Creepy camp visitor. My friend pointed me to this page earlier today when we were all swapping creepy stories, so I thought I'd share mine as well. Last year, my friends and I went camping in Allegheny State Park. It was around the same time and it was raining quite a bit that week. It was just light rain that day, so we set up tent and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night because my feet were wet and I found the tent zipper was open a little bit. I didn't think about it that much at the time and thought it was just my mistake, even though I remember I took care to close it all the way down, so I closed it and went back to sleep. There were totally 6 of us and 3 tents, and when we woke up in the morning, my friend was trying to hang a sock on a branch for drying because he didn't close the tent flap properly and got his socks wet. The guys in the 3rd tent couldn't really remember if their tent was open too, because he hadn't really paid attention, but there was a bit of moisture inside near the zipper. This really creeped us out because we thought someone had tried to steal from us or worse, kill us during the night. So we thought we'd look around the tent for clues. I thought it'd be a good idea for me to at least if we found an animal footprint or nothing, because I thought it was probably deer and it was somehow managed to open the tent with its snouts because they smelled delicious potato chips inside or something. The place we had set up tent had a gravel, but in the muddy area near the trees we found prints of bare human feet. It was a regular size print and weren't very deep. Since our worst fears had been confirmed, we decided to pack up immediately and continue our trek. This is when I noticed that all the prints were of the right feet. I was trying to make out which direction they were headed towards, but I realized they were all of the right feet. It wasn't just a single straight line of footprints either. It was like the prints of a person with 2 right feet. There were plenty of prints, and though they weren't all that well defined, they were clear enough to make out every one of them was a print of the right foot. I can't think of an explanation for this. I can think of a few explanations, kind of in general. All simple ones, really. But in general, the incident itself was really, really creepy. Do ghosts appear when, after you are afraid? Okay, so I have to say that something creepy happens at least once a month for me. But if I type them all here, then it would be way too long, which would defeat the purpose of this. I'll just talk about what happened tonight. So let's get to it. I work at a pizza place, and I am the primary closer, which means I get out very late and do almost all of the work. So tonight, I was about to cut my old manager's pizza. We use blades to cut pizza very sharp, very big. However, when I went to pick up the blade, it slipped and sliced my thumb. The cut itself was very deep and blood was steadily running from the wound. The kicker though, I hate blood. The very sight of blood makes my vision blurry and makes me see stars, and then sometimes faint. My buddy knew this and covered me for a while, and I stepped outside and sat down for a good few minutes and recovered. I got back inside, still feeling woozy, and finally finished my job. After work, I was driving to my girlfriend's house, and it started to storm really bad on the highway. There was thick traffic. Everyone slammed on their brakes and put their caution lights on. I slammed on my brakes and started sliding from all the water. Needless to say, adrenaline was pumping, and I will admit it scared me. I finished driving the next 10 miles at no visibility until I got to my exit where it suddenly stopped raining. I felt relieved as I could breathe again. Another 2 miles, and I would be at my girlfriend's apartment and home free. I pulled in and parked in my favorite spot, the handicap unloading zone, like a dick, got out of my car, and started walking towards my girlfriend's house. This is where things started getting bizarre. I felt as if I was being watched, but couldn't find out from where. I was looking into my girlfriend's apartment via the sliding door facing the street, and I could see someone standing there. They were my girlfriend's height and build, but were wearing what seemed to be a blue t-shirt and red sweatpants. My girlfriend would never wear a blue t-shirt, and I do know she wears red sweatpants, but as I was walking up, I was watching this figure. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be moving, like trying to walk, but not getting very far across the room, almost like it was a character in a video game glitching. All the body parts seemed to be moving abnormally in different directions, but it wasn't fluid like human movement. There is no better way to explain the movement than sort of like a wacky waving inflatable tube man being filmed with a time-lapse camera. This is exactly what it looked like, but with legs as if it were trying to move. It made my blood run cold. Now I vape. Yes, it is related to the story, stay with me here. But as I hit my e-cig and I blew a cloud in front of my vision, after it rains the clouds are thicker, it seemed to disappear when the smoke cleared. I thought I was just seeing shit, and continued to walk in. I opened the door and walked inside, walking past my girlfriend's mom's room, who was snoring, and walked in my girlfriend's room, where she was dead asleep, wearing a gray t-shirt and a pair of short purple gym shorts with a red stripe. Whatever I saw was not her. I crawled in bed with her and told her about my day as normal, gave her a massage and scratched her back and whatnot, when 10 minutes after, I heard her mom's door open. You can see her door from across the hall. There were no lights on, so all I saw were feet and legs walking into the kitchen and living room area, where I just saw that weird aforementioned thing. The kitchen light turned on, and I heard the sink turn on as well. I thought, oh, her mom is just getting a glass of water, no biggie. Also, released from her mother's room was her dog, Tiny Thing, jumped up on the bed with us and tried to cuddle up and steal my girlfriend's back scratches. After a few minutes, I noticed that the sink didn't stop, and my girlfriend's mom did not return to her room. I let it run for about 5 more minutes as I didn't want to make her mom feel weird for getting a pot of water to start boiling at 1 a.m. Whatever, I don't know. I just didn't want to bother her. So, getting annoyed that the sink was still on, my girlfriend asked for me to go check out what she was doing. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway that was now being partially illuminated by the kitchen light, and noticed something that made my blood run cold. As I made my way past her mother's room, I could still hear her snoring. I turned around and peeked in her room to find her wrapped up in blankets with the other dog cuddled up on her neck. I turned around thinking, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, this is where I die. If I were watching this in a movie, I would scream, turn around, bitch, and run back into the other room, shut the door, bitch, go, go, go. But for some reason, I decided to walk into the kitchen. I looked around and found a normally messy kitchen, but the faucet was on full blast. I have this feeling a lot when I know I'm either walking into something paranormal or I know there is a spider near me. It's the same feeling. I reluctantly walked into the kitchen and turned off the faucet. The faucet was now off. I thought mission accomplished, now get the fuck out of there, but looked around just to see if I could see my glitchy friend again. But it was nowhere to be found. As I turned my head, something weird happened. It was as if I entered a cave or put on noise-canceling earphones. I could no longer hear a single thing. Not the neighbor's washing machine, not the refrigerator, not the rain outside, not the AC unit outside, not the lights, or my girlfriend's snoring mother. It's just, all the sound around me just got hit by some universal mute button. I've never heard anything that silent in my life. I still couldn't see anything, so I decided that whatever it was wanted me to get the fuck out of there. So I woke my girlfriend back up, got her to lock the door behind me, left, and I went home and started typing this post right now. Sure, it's a long post, but what do you think? Did something see me as weak for being scared during the day and decided to fuck with me? Was it just seeing this stuff because I was already in a heightened sense of alertness? Do paranormal things take advantage of you because you have been scared earlier in the day? And lastly, would being scared allow you to look for the paranormal easier, or would it just complicate things? I still can't think of a logical explanation for this. My mom and I work together, and our company has an annual party for the entire region. We have an office dinner on Friday, with the actual party, sit-down dinner, awards, etc. on Saturday night at a hotel. She works with a very capable event planner, but nonetheless tends to be pretty stressed and cranky in the months or so leading up to the actual event. A few years ago, however, this was compounded by the terminal illness of one of her friends. This particular woman, Liz, has been a friend of a friend for a long time, but Mom only got to really know her in that last year or so. I'd met her once during the summertime and quite liked her. She was funny, interesting, and seemed pretty accepting of what was coming, as well as determined to enjoy whatever she had left. Anyways, I live in the city and had taken the train out to the suburbs that Friday. Mom was pissed when she picked me up because she had forgotten her jewelry at home 40 miles away and didn't have time to go back for it before the party the following night. We get back to hotel where we're staying in 2 adjoining rooms. She has a suite with kitchen, etc., and have my own smaller room bathroom with a one-sided door. In other words, our luggage was completely separate, packed in different locations, and not overlapping at all. We were downstairs in the lobby that evening, waiting for the hotel shuffle to take us to our office staff dinner at a nearby restaurant, when Mom noticed it had started to rain. She suggested I run back up to the room and grab my umbrella. I should add that this was maybe at most 10 minutes after we had first left the room, not enough time for housekeeping to come and go. I go to get my umbrella out of my overnight bag, and holy shit, what else? Mom's jewelry case. We found out that Sunday morning that Liz had died late Friday night, but Mom didn't put 2 and 2 together until a few weeks later at the memorial service, when her family reminisced about what a prankster she was with her siblings, then later April fooling her kids every year. That's really the only explanation for how Mom's missing jewelry ended up in my bag in a locked room, so I guess I'll take it. The Wanderer posted this over on the creepy subreddit yesterday, but thought it might be an interest to some on here as well. Honestly, I don't know if it would be considered paranormal, but the whole event still feels somewhat unnatural to me. A couple years back, myself and my mother were visiting her sister in the north of the country, a few hundred miles from where we lived. My mom had decided to drive rather than take the train, and after staying the weekend, we started our return trip. We left on a Monday morning, but as the distance to our town was so great, we called in with my mother's friend with the intention of spending the night. It was a really nice house, but it is literally in the middle of nowhere, at least a mile from the next nearest house, and miles again from the nearest shop or town. As we got close to the house, a summer storm hit. Torrential rain, thunder, and lightning. It was huge. It turned out to be quite lucky we had planned to stay overnight, as driving conditions had become quickly dangerous. The house was undergoing massive interior renovation at the time, which meant my mom and me would be spending the night crashing in the living room, as all the spare rooms were out of commission. Once the workmen had left for the day, we spent most of the evening on the back porch watching the storm, before we turned in for the night. I crashed on the couch, while Mom took a leather divan type sofa that was placed directly under the window that I faced the driveway. Late into the night, I woke up feeling very uneasy, as if I was being watched. I opened my eyes, but didn't move anything other than my head towards my mom, who was sleeping. There was a hooded black figure standing at the window over my mom, with his hands up to the window, as if he were trying to see if anyone or anything was inside the living room. The driveway had a very powerful light fixed on a pole at the edge of the front yard. My mom, exhausted from the driving, was completely out for the count, despite the window being no more than 18 inches from her face. The figure continued to slowly scan the room, then stopped suddenly, as if he had just seen me. The yard light was positioned so that no light was cast into the house, so the room was completely pitch black. By now, the severity of the storm had increased, and thunder and lightning was striking frequently. As if on a cue, a lightning strike hit and seemed to illuminate the inside of the living room. The figure leaves its vantage point and started walking towards the right-hand side of the house, where there is another window offering a better view of the living room. Without saying anything, I waited until the figure was out of sight and slid off the couch, scuttling into the doorway just off the living room and out of the second window's line of sight. I peek from behind the wall and can see the figure at the second window. By this stage, I freaked out and was unsure of what to do. Lightning hit again, and the figure snapped his head right to where I was hiding. I remember being almost frozen, feeling his eyes were locked onto me. He left the second window and headed back towards the first. I somehow managed to move, running to the stairway in the corner of the room that led up to the bedroom of my mom's friend. I burst in and shouted that there was a man outside, looking in. Once over the initial surprise of me waking them in such a panic, the husband, a large man in his own right, jumped up, summoned his eldest son, who was a couple years older than me, found 2 cricket bats and marched down the stairs. The rest of the family and myself followed warily. My mother, having been woken by the commotion, met us at the bottom of the stairs, having just been passed in the hallway by her best friend's half-naked husband, toting a cricket bat and marching out into the storm. I explained what happened, but could tell my mom was an equal part skeptical as she was shocked. We waited for what seemed like an eternity in the darkness, and no one thought or perhaps dared to turn on a light. Mom's friend tried to reassure us it was just a late-night traveler who had broken down or got lost. Her husband and son returned after a minute or two. The husband went as far as to get changed and check the grounds before he hopped in his car and drove the road a couple miles in both directions. There was nothing. There had been no sound of a car leaving the driveway or any physical evidence of anyone being outside at all. This did little to reassure me, and I was unable to shake the feeling of being watched that originally woke me that night. We managed a fitful night's sleep before we gathered our things to set out the next morning. My mother was convinced I had imagined the whole thing, and told her friends so by a way of apology. This annoyed me at first, although I knew that the most logical explanation for them was that, as no one else had saw the figure. Looking to forget the whole experience, I did not argue the matter. As Mom said her goodbyes, I went and snapped a picture of the house before returning to find her waiting by the car and ready to go. I quickly popped my head in the house to say my own goodbyes and apologize for waking them last night. Our car horn sounded, and the husband remarked Mom was getting impatient, which is not like her. I shrugged it off at first, but the car horn kept sounding, with 2 long continuous beeps, and a third and a final one, which was a good bit shorter. I went to the side of the house to where a car was parked. It hadn't moved, and sat with all the doors closed apart from the passenger door on the driver's side, which was wide open. It was as I got closer to the car that I saw Mom, slumped over the steering wheel. Frantically, I pulled open the door and tried to shake her awake. I found the pulse on her neck, which seemed strong, but she seemed to be completely unconscious. I pulled her out of the car and shouted for help as I carried her into the house. I set her on the same couch I slept on the night before, and with the help of her friend, tried to bring her around from what we assumed was a random fainting spell. Thankfully, she revived quite quickly, and within the hour was ready to hit the road. Her friends were more than happy to let us stay for the day, but she was keen to get home, and I was keen not to spend another night there. She didn't remember passing out or even getting in the car, and it was only on the way home the question finally occurred to me for the first time. Why was the passenger door open? Bridgewater, the abandoned cemetery. This is my ghost experience. This is my 3rd post in 3 days. I admit that telling all these stories has really begun to make me feel better. Thank you for the acceptance and understanding. The following story is very long and contains many components. 4 years ago, I had a group of friends who enjoyed drinking, smoking, and partying. I can't remember the first person who brought the Bridgewater legend. I just remember it all began with the tale of Witch's Castle, where my friend's aunt had been burned alive in the 80s, which is unrelated. One night, a friend of mine, who was higher than a kite from smoking marijuana, began to tell a story of her experiences resulting from the cemetery. Mind you, I did not believe her. Hell, she was high. Her name was K-Day. She said that it began when they all went up to Bridgewater, they being her friends, to party. Apparently, teenagers enjoyed stomping around on old graves while drunk. Well, K-Day told us how she wandered off into the woods with a couple of people from her group, and they made it to a break in the woods with an old wooden home that once stood. She said that there was an incredibly tall black figure standing by a pole. They all ran. Upon returning with the rest of the group, the figure and the pole were no longer there. They left that night, and over the course of several weeks, nearly all of them were involved in some sort of tragic accident or had a family member go through something devastating. K-Day blamed it on that night and how they had acted. My first night at the cemetery. We drove to the little town by Salem where the cemetery is located. We headed down the old road between the cornfields, passed through dark, empty woods, and came to a field clearing. There it was, Bridgewater Cemetery, where many murdered women and children laid at rest, with the slaves buried on the outside. Upon looking at the cemetery, there was a large tree to the right, located by a barbed wire fence. People say that it was where they would hang the slaves and blacks. The gate of the cemetery was about 6 feet tall, black iron fencing all the way around with a giant arch nearly 13 feet in the air with the last name Bridgewater. Background legend. I did some research on the cemetery at the time, and from what I can remember, there was a main storyline for the hauntings. There was a man with the last name Bridgewater, and he lives in a small southern Indiana town with his family. He owned a white horse. Himself and the rest of the men left for war. Upon their return, they had found that the women and children had been slaughtered and laid in the middle of the streets as the houses burned. When they approached the bodies, the men were bombarded by 12 Shawnee Indians. They were buried in the cemetery. It is said that if you approach the cemetery and turn off the car, leave the keys inside, then the doors unlocked, and exit. Upon returning, the handprints of children will be on the car. It is also said that one can witness the white horse as well as the ghost of Mr. Bridgewater if the spirits are disturbed. Now, back to the cemetery. I was with 4 others. We faced the cemetery. My dog was acting normal. Exiting the car, I shined my lights on the massive archway. Upon entering, it seemed as though the cemetery was much darker than anything outside of its fencing. I took this as sheer chance, and perhaps due to the large forest at the back of it. Shining my light on the gravestones, I noticed that there were indeed many children, infants, 2-year-olds, barely old enough to form a full sentence. I felt sick. My dog began acting up, whining, whimpering, doing things she doesn't often do. One of the other girls began freaking out, so we returned to the car. That's when it got incredibly weird for me. I was in shotgun, my dog cradled up in my lap as if she was a puppy. At this point, she was pretty old. My friend driving attempted to turn on the car. The engine wouldn't roll over. The girl in the backseat began screaming, and how there were shadows low to the ground running around outside. The moment the car started, my friend attempted to rev the engine, and yet it was as if something was holding on to the bumper. It let go, and the lights flashed on, and about 30 feet or more in front of the car, running across the road, was a very large white creature, moving fast as it could from one side of the woods to the other. Before I knew it, it was gone. I thought I was the only one who had seen it, until I turned around and saw the others staring forward in awe. We left. A month goes by. I'm staying in Salem at this point, with 2 friends. We think it to be a good idea to make ourselves our very own Ouija board and head back to the cemetery, seeing what else we can get to happen. Why not, right? We were wrong. We get to the cemetery. I have a white candle, incense, a prayer prepared, and the handmade board. Rather than entering the cemetery, we begin outside by the slave tree. I cannot remember all of the questions that had been asked, but I remember that the spirit was not a good one. Rather than leaving, we enter the cemetery. I got in touch with a woman who said her initials were CKB. Later come to find they could stand for Cicely Kesey Bridgewater. Spelling may be off, it's been years. This woman said that she had been murdered along with her 6 or 7 children. When I asked by who, she told me 11. Later I found out a dozen Indians invaded the town and slaughtered the families. As I asked her if she needed my help, something very odd began to occur. First, the responses were hurry, go, he's here. When I asked who, all I got was him, go now, killed. My dog began to bark, and the third friend who was holding the dog and the flashlight began to complain of the rain. I remember looking at the other girl who was doing the board with me, and I said, it isn't raining. That was until I looked up around and noticed the gravestones were getting wet, and the grass was getting wet. Katie and my dog were getting wet, yet the girl and I were perfectly dry, as was the board. Yet the moment she picked up that board and blew out the candle, I felt the rain hit my arms. We raced back to the car. There were shadows racing through the woods. I felt as if my heart was going to jump out of my body. We made it to the car and sped away, terrified of becoming lost in the cornfield maze. We reached the gas station. As one of the girls went inside to pay for gas, I began researching the cemetery on my phone. That was when I assumed I identified who CKB was. It was just too uncanny that the story matched up with the historical events recorded, something none of us knew prior to the visit. While researching, I heard a gasp followed by a whimper in the driver's seat. I looked over, and Katie was pressed so far up against the window, staring towards the seat behind shotgun, pale as could be. I asked her what was wrong, and she merely pointed. I turned around and saw it. Through the fog that had formed inside the car due to our breath and the rain outside dropping the temperature, was a handprint on the window. Not an adult-sized handprint, but the handprint of a child, a very small child, no older than 3 on the inside of the window. I made a mark next to the handprint to see when it had been made, and it was just as fresh as mine. Mind you, the person who was in the back seat had been sitting behind the driver and pumping and paying for gas, and took a smoke break for the last 5 to 10 minutes. I felt cold chills run down my spine as each hair on my arm stood. Something was with us. We returned to Katie's grandmother's house, silent. Hours went by before I made it clear that we must return and close out the board. Something followed us. They thought I was crazy. After coercion, I got them to take me back. I sat down in the same spot, lit the candle and the incense. I attempted to get into touch with CBK again. Before I could, a bunch of young adults showed up in their cars, half drunk. They made fun of us at first, then decided they would like to watch. At this point, there were about 12 or more people in the cemetery. After many minutes, I thought I had gone back in touch with CKB. It wasn't until the board spelled "fuck you" that I knew I had hit something terrible. I asked if it had been in the car with us. The reply was, "Scared you, yes? Children die. Children cry." As felt the urge to vomit while my skin began to feel clammy, I immediately proceeded to close the board. There are multiple techniques. I believe one of the girls lit the board on fire. I just cannot remember if it was at the cemetery or at their home when they did this. Upon leaving the cemetery, as the others continued drinking and laughing at what had just happened, thinking we were insane, a military kid dropped to the ground on his back and laid there for several minutes not moving. By the time we reached him, he was foaming at the mouth, his eyes in the back of his head. As he began writhing around like a fish out of water, he was convulsing. It was terrifying given the circumstances. I never felt so weird, so cold during the summer. I knew there were people around me, because I could see them, yet this lingering feeling of being watched by something I couldn't see refused to leave me. Once the kid got on his feet, he apologized and said that it was the first seizure he had had since he was a kid. Said it was due to all the excitement and anxiety associated with fear, whatever, right? While we're preparing to leave, as the strangers continued to drink, 2 giant trucks began to cross the field, going fast and headed our way. By the time they reached us, I noticed that they were filled with men bearing hunting guns, and they were not happy to see us. I don't remember all of what they said. I just know that it was something along the lines of, do you really want to come in and piss them off? You're trespassing, and we got the right to shoot. We got out of there fast. I want to know if anyone else has experienced something terrifying through a Ouija board.